Hello, my name's Simon Howard, I'm from Bailey. No, we wouldn't agree that a higher standard is necessary at the moment. I mean, our testing is very much in its infancy. I mean, this is the first testing of its type. There's no standard for it at the moment. And sort of many of the mistakes we made in the original designs were largely as a result of the fact we had nothing to compare it against. When we went to see Millbrook to set up the test, we asked if we could base it on anything. And the test they came up with, they called an R17 luggage retention test. So basically we had nothing to work against. So a lot of the work we've done in the first 5 tests is to get the rig up to a suitable state for us to develop still further. So it's very much in its infancy. We're very encouraged that other manufacturers are now taking up this sort of testing. So together as an industry we can continue to move safety forward. Motorhomes, coach-built motorhomes, much in the same way as the conversions, they do have to comply with type approval. The National Caravan Council also examine all new motorhomes to look for health and safety aspects. The seat belts have the same board test. So there's already a tremendous amount of safety and thought into safety in current motorhomes. However, it's an area that's very important to us, and we're very passionate about it because, believe it or not, us manufacturers do like to sleep at night, and we want to be comfortable that we're making this product as safe as possible for you to use, and consequently that's why we're trying to push safety testing forward.
Yes, if you are buying a used vehicle and converted it from, just repeating slightly what I was saying before, is there is no legislation under type approval which means that you have to have that vehicle done to the standards we were just looking at on the video and what I was talking about. There are manufacturers such as ourselves who will convert customers' own vehicles, second-hand vehicles, and we certainly do, and I would hope others do as well, that you apply the same standards and the same manner of work to a second-hand vehicle as you do to a brand new vehicle. Brand new T5s are expensive. It is a cheaper route to buy a second-hand vehicle, but you're always in that scenario where you say, if I'm putting a relatively expensive conversion into a van, which it tends to be more at the top of the market when you're going to people who've got European whole vehicle type approval, you then have to look and say, well, how old a van do I want to go to put a relatively expensive conversion into? So that, it's a bit of a conundrum. I often find that people who come to us end in this sort of nomad's land of, well, if they spend £40,000 they get what they want, and if they spend 32, well, that's all right, but they're not quite sure, and they end up spending 25 sometimes and buying something second-hand because they're sort of stuck in the middle between brand new and good second-hand. Buying a van, getting it converted, it's an expensive conversion, so there's no magic answer, but you would hope that all converters who've got European whole vehicle would apply the same standards of fitting to second-hand as well as new.
Yes, very well spotted. I was hoping we were going to get away with that, but obviously not. To be fair, we moved the dummies around throughout the trip. We had lots of different size dummies. We tried to assess who was most likely to be sitting in the back, and obviously we're primarily testing family motorhomes, so we wanted children's dummies as well as adult dummies, and we moved them around throughout the test to assess how they perform in different positions, because obviously different weights put different pressures on the furniture. Incidentally, in the final test, one of the things we were looking at, the problem we had in the first test was we had the 2 adult dummies on the outside, and they hit their heads on the overhead lockers, and that was particularly an issue with the downlights, and virtually one of the dummies' head actually went through the light. It melted the dummy's head. So we wanted to redesign the lockers and reposition the lights, so putting the dummies back on the outside was a conscious move to test the redesign of the overhead lockers. But I think it's important to stress that this is an ongoing process. This is not the end result. I mean, we use that hackneyed phrase that you get in a lot of reality TV shows. This is a journey, and this is very much part of a continuous development process. programme, and we'll be going back to Millbrook again to continue this testing. I think what we're waiting for at the moment is the arrival of a second chassis from Peugeot, because after 4 tests, that one's given up the ghost. But once we get that one, we'll be back again to continue the testing process. In answer to the seat question, yes, we did put one in the final test. At the end of every test, Millbrook come together with us and they give us advice and suggestion on areas we can look at. And one of the things they said, well, there's always going to be a driver's seat there, so why not put it in as part of the test? It's more realistic, and if it does give you a bit of help or support with the bulkhead, again, it's not unrealistic. It's a real life situation, and what we've got to try and do is come up with a test which accurately reflects how the motorhomes are being used.
Yeah, you can, and we've done this a few times with people, you can, if you have a van, and it's, in our case, if it's a Transporter T5, you can take out seats that are there if you are not happy with them and not happy with the seat belts and the fittings, and you could replace them with the type of seats and the fitting process that you saw in the video. We've done that a number of times with people, probably half a dozen or so, perfectly possible to do. The seats we get in, we can actually order to specific widths, so we can actually order a bespoke width seat to fit into a particular gap that's there. Yes, we have to prepare the floor and make sure that the strengthening above the floor is correct, and then obviously the fitting and engineered plates that go on the underside. So you can take an older vehicle, retrospectively take out the rear seats in our particular case, if it's a T5, and then put in the new seats to replace them. So that's a possible avenue.
If it's a coach-built motorhome, there is the possibility, I know definitely for an AMC chassis, because that's all that we use, you can have the outriggers fitted by your dealer as an optional extra. Or and the other thing is the fridge, because obviously that's for us was quite catastrophic. You can, with Dometic's permission, your dealer will be able to fit a bolt through the floor of your motorhome and then cap that off inside. And I believe Thetford are also looking at that. So as long as your fridge is to the floor, you'll be able to do that as well.
And make sure you stow your table when you're in transit.
You should definitely sit them against the window, and if you can, an adult next to them. Just to support the seats, because we haven't got ISO fixing in coach-built motorhomes at the moment. So.
No, not safely. Sideways seats, Barry was saying 2007 for all new vehicles were banned. So sideways seats are proven to be dangerous in the event of an accident. There are plenty of people who'll fit seat belts for you. They'll say, yes, come along and I'll put a lap belt in or a seat belt in. It's a 3-point seat belt. There is absolutely no way you can tell whether that seat belt is going to be safe or not. It's simply not possible. The only way you can ever tell a seat belt is 100% secure is by physically testing it in the vehicle. You can make assumptions by looking at the fittings. The belt itself may be an approved belt, but approvals for belts are only done in certain positions, because if you put a belt in a different position where the angles change, then the force on the belt is then different. So it's a very complicated area. There's plenty of people who do it for you, but I'm sure a belt is better than no belt, so I guess we start from that position. But sideways seats have been proven to be more dangerous, most definitely, than front or rear facing. If your vehicle is classified by the DVLA as a motor caravan, correct me if I'm wrong here, Barry, so it has fixed furniture, it has a removable table, it has a seat that folds into a bed, it has fixed cooking facilities, you're deemed to be, on your V5, a motor caravan. Current legislation says you are allowed to travel in the back of that vehicle without wearing a safety belt. If you are stopped by the police and they deem it to be unsafe for some reason or another, they could prevent you from travelling. But technically you can travel in the back of that vehicle without wearing a safety belt. Now, if it's a manufacturer now making that vehicle new, then they have to designate the seats travelling or non-travelling. But if it's a vehicle that's already on the road, it's registered and it's running around and it was made a number of years ago, then that's not necessarily the case. So you are allowed to travel in the back, correct?
Yeah. I'll just add to that. Someone's quite right. If you've got a motorhome that was built in the past, it's a 4-berth, and you've just got the 2 seat belts in the cab, then legally you can carry people in the back, but if there is a seat belt in the back in the habitation area, it must be worn. Now, there's a situation where Simon alluded to that the police could stop you. There's no legislation that says you cannot travel without a seat belt in the back of a motorhome where there isn't a seat belt, but the police could stop you, and there are other general regulations which says that you mustn't drive in an unsafe manner or your load in an unsafe manner. So they could take you to court, and then it'd be up to the court whether you were travelling in an unsafe manner. But if, of course, you had a motorhome that historically was built, it was a 4-berth and only the 2 seat belts, I think the chances are you get away with it. On the other hand, if you decide to take your son's football team with you and threw them in the back, then there's a good chance to say, well, hang on a minute, apart from the fact you probably exceeded your payload, that this is unsafe. But it would be up, at the end of the day, it would be up to a court to decide whether it was unsafe or not. But there are some specifics in seatbelt legislation, like children under 3 must be restrained. They have to be in a seatbelt. And then the children over 3 but under 12 have got to be in an approved restraint, although if there isn't a seatbelt available, they can travel without.
You possibly could get a longer bolt with a support structure and build the support structure underneath. You probably lose the cupboard or whatever it is that's underneath the fridge, and then like put a big spacer in between it, and that would do the same job. You could just fit it to the floor, or through the floor and into the chassis is what we do at the moment. We don't actually fit the fridge bolt, doesn't actually go into the outrigger, it goes into the floor and chassis.
So it's just worth saying that first test was very much a worst case scenario, because largely through naivety we didn't have a cab on the front test, so any potential failures in the design were emphasised through that. As subsequent tests, the fridge did move without being bolted, but it didn't fly out through the front. But once it was bolted through, it didn't move, and also it anchored the kitchen unit, so that didn't move around as well. So while that first video is quite frightening, that's actually a very much a worst case scenario, and everyone obviously has a cab at the front, so it's unlikely to happen in a real life situation.